Welcome everybody to this week's episode of Pop Culture Double Date. This week we are talking about Westworld, Season 2, Episode 5. And today we have Maggie, Anaja, and Gerald, and Darren, who's me. And as usual, this is a full spoilers podcast, so we're just going to get right into it. Hi everybody.
Hi.
Okay, so let's start by going around the table and getting everybody's kind of impressions on this week's episode. This week that's been based in Shogun World. Who wants to start?
I'll start. It was really great to finally see Shogun World, and parts of it were fantastic. So as soon as they walked into Shogun World and you see the scene with the two children placing the little creature on the guy's head, I immediately recognized that as a scene from Westworld. And then to just see the whole heist play out, but with these Japanese characters was so awesome. And it was so much more exciting watching it with bows and arrows as well, and to sort of see Maeve's shock and Hector's shock, it was really awesome. So that was great, but I think I was getting to a point where I was wondering if it was just a little bit too slow, like there was just too much going on there, which I guess they had to do to establish that world and to establish those characters, but it did feel like we got really sort of held up there, and I really had to think about, well, what did we get out of this episode? And I guess we did get more than I initially realized, so overall I'm happy with the episode.
Jazz?
Okay, I thought this was just a table-setting episode in the sense that we just got a couple of transitions without really advancing the plot too far, I think. What exactly did we learn? We learned that Maeve is developing superpowers while she's in Shogun World. We learned that Dolores is now in the process of changing Teddy's personality so that he becomes a total shit. And besides that, I'm not sure we learned a great deal. I think what this episode reveals is a slight problem with the structure of the show as it goes forward. And if I can be permitted just to draw a comparison with Game of Thrones, there are about 6 or 7 plot lines, and each episode devotes some time to all of them. Now we have in Westworld 4 or 5 plot lines running at the same time, but each episode will be devoted to only about 2 or 3 of them at any one time. And so we have, not much story filling out a fair amount of time, and I just wonder whether we're seeing a bit of mid-season filler with this episode. So I know Anna just said she found the episode more satisfying in retrospect than at the time whilst watching it, but I think in the end I wasn't entirely satisfied by this episode. And that's despite the fact that it was pretty stylish.
Well, Jazz, you've satisfied your Game of Thrones quota. Every episode we've talked about Westworld, you've talked about Game of Thrones as well. So let's make sure you talk about Game of Thrones every week. Max,
does anyone sense that I'm feeling there's a void in my life that I'm trying to fill?
I'm definitely sensing that, Jerry. Mags, what are your sort of general thoughts on the episode?
Well, I really enjoyed the episode as a standalone episode. I thought they lovingly crafted this Shogun World in a kind of homage to the Japanese samurai movies. I thought that was really well done in terms of world building. Similar views to Gerald and Anaja about what the purpose of this episode was overall. And I thought in terms of sort of character development, it seemed more as a device to contrast between Maeve and Dolores and the ways in which that they're pursuing their own individual goals and how that contributes to, I guess, that overall objective about what happens to the hosts and what their destiny is.
Yeah. Look, I'd agree with. Look, I think I agree with pretty much everyone's points, by and large. I kind of felt that this week, it didn't feel as hefty as last week's episode, and I think it was because last week's episode was thematically really important for the show, right? Like, it talked about really weighty weighty themes like creation, God, the devil, all this type of stuff, right? And this week, it was not thematically as weighty. It was more a character-driven, plot-driven episode. It was, kind of focused on Maeve and her character and building the characters of Dolores and Maeve. So I kind of felt like some of that heft was lost because it wasn't like a traditionally thematically heavy Westworld episode. So I absolutely get everybody's view that it kind of feels a little bit like filler as a result. I think the other thing, though, for me is that, look, to be honest, I enjoyed the episode. I think I'm kind of falling more on Mags's view, which is that as a sort of fun little detour, it was a pretty fun little detour. And, like, for me, I kind of saw it as, even as a fun detour, as an episode, I thought it was really, like, on reflection, it was quite well crafted, right? Because in some ways, this episode was just about, it was like compare and contrast the episode, right? So within the Maeve story, you have the compare and contrast between Shogun World and Westworld, and then on a larger level, you have the compare and contrast between Maeve and Dolores, right? So I kind of felt like, they're kind of thinking about how to structure this stuff, and there is, like, for an episode that's about parallels, the episode itself is paralleling each other. It's quite a nice little conceit that they're running throughout the episode. So, look, it wasn't the heftiest of Westworld episodes, but I personally, I thought it was fun, right? I agree. It's not going to be like the Westworld episode that everyone remembers. So,
well, when you look back on it, there's more stuff happens than you realize. Like, so, as like you guys said, with character development, Maeve, she strengthens that view that there are some things that are more important than freedom, and really sort of forges this bond and friendship with Akura, which does contrast so much with Dolores's sort of attitudes. And then her powers grow, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. And then you see character development for Sizemore too, I think, because you really see, like, first of all, he's impressed by Maeve's new powers, but he's also really impressed by, is it Akura? Am I saying her name? What's the name?
Which one?
Akane.
Yeah. He's really impressed by Akane impressed by her composure when she loses her daughter figure, and impressed by how she can do that dance with like such composure, and you can see that on his face. And of course he found a radio on this episode, so he's going to have the ability to betray Maeve at some point, and I think this is part of his development arc, and we'll find out, is he going to actually betray her? Is he going to betray her but then feel upset about it because he's come to care about her? Dolores, she goes full Delos on Teddy this episode. We find out what's going on in her mind. She sees kindness as weakness, as a virus. Kindness equals weakness. Weakness is a virus. It needs to be killed out. In terms of plot development, you've got the humans. They've gathered the hosts inside their little headquarters. Is this like a Trojan horse setup? The hosts are now inside. They've gone from the lake to inside the main sort of human headquarter area, which I can't remember what it's called. We found out that 1/3 of the hosts have their brains wiped out, so we need to figure out what's going on there. We find out more about Dolores' plan. We know that it involves a train. Teddy, as we know him, is gone. So stuff's happened.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. This is true. Stuff. Look, I mean, I think every episode, like, stuff happens. I think I was just trying to understand why it is that all of us felt it was less hefty than usual, and I think it's just because usually Westworld is so dense, right? Yeah.
I think we have to remember as well that I can't remember his name. Gerald will know, but Floki.
Carl Strand.
That's it. Carl Strand. Sorry. At the beginning of the episode, he does say what we've all been thinking, which is, all these disparate threads. How do they fit together? Once we find that out, then the story will unfold by itself. So it's almost like that's a signal of, this is the halfway point for this season. This is the point where all those threads are going to start to, come together. So maybe this is the episode where the last episode where the writers thought, oh no, anything else that we want to add to this, we better do it now.
Okay, so I think the next point that I wanted to talk about was just general thoughts on Shogun World. I thought that as an idea, Shogun World was really interesting, and as Mag said, I thought it was like quite well realized as well. I mean, the sets, the costumes, the music in particular, is just really well done, right? Like the way they kind of like, they've got, I think they had, Gerald would know this better than me, but was it the doors? Like, was it painted black? I don't know. Maybe it was like, it felt like there was kind of familiar music that was sort of remixed in this Japanese, with this Japanese sensibility, and that with this overarching sort of parallel where everything that is happening in sort of Shogun World is like this weird analog of Westworld. I thought that was really cool. But for me, what I really loved about Shogun World from a character perspective is that I felt like when the characters go into Shogun World, Maeve, Hector, Armistice, right? The hosts, right? The hosts kind of in Shogun World kind of have their first experience of what it's actually like to be guests, almost, right? And you can sense, like, they have that sense of wonder and, so I thought that from a character development perspective, especially for Maeve, Shogun World was kind of important because it kind of helped her understand what it's kind of like on the other side of the ledger. Obviously, she's never going to see Shogun World in exactly the same way as, I guess, someone like Sizemore or just a sort of normal human guest, right? But you do get that sort of sense of, oh my god, this is really different and weird and like wonderful in some ways. And so I thought that was really cool about Shogun World. Does anybody have any other thoughts on that?
I just want to give a shout out to what I thought was the moment of the episode, and that's when Sylvester asks Felix why he can't sell something to captors, and Felix says, "I'm from Hong Kong, asshole." That I thought was the sort of comic highlight of the episode. Look, I think Shogun World was very stylishly and interestingly realized, and to pick up on something that you just said, Daz. It's almost as if the theme of this episode is creating facsimiles. So we know that Westworld is a facsimile of the real West, and Shogun World is sort of a facsimile of Westworld in the sense that so much of the story arcs of all the various characters in Shogun World were ripped off from Westworld, as Maeve observes and calls out Sizemore on. And so it seems as if the show is just running for a moment with the idea of creating copies or facsimiles of other things, and that then connects this episode with the story of Delos and repeated multiple copies of Delos being created. I mean, I'm still not sure what exactly the show has to say about that at this point. But it's certainly the case, I think, that the themes of creating facsimiles and replication are constantly being toyed with, at least at this point in the season.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yep, Mags, go.
I was just going to say, just to pick up on that point that Gerald just made as well, I think it's almost like even if you do try, the message might be, even if you do try to create a copy, it's never going to be an exact copy. Every copy is actually the birth of a new life. And you kind of see that in, Akane, who is meant to be, Maeve in the Shogun World. But her love for Sakura is similar to, but different from Maeve's love for her daughter. And the way in which it plays out, Maeve compliments Akane for her love, but she also realizes that what drives Akane is, at the end, fundamentally different from what drives her.
Yes. Yes. Agreed.
And I think that's actually quite important because the contrast to Delos is trying to replicate himself completely, as if he had never died, and it's not as if he's trying to create a new life. He's trying to prolong his own existing life. I think that's the difference between, what Shogun World represents versus what Delos represents.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that in Westworld, in Sweetwater, when Maeve is playing the madam at the brothel/saloon, she's not a mother, and she doesn't harbour any sort of maternal sentiments.
No. Yeah.
Except for deep in her unconscious, when her memories are meant to be wiped but are still there. Whereas Akane is very much a mother in Shogun World, in her current incarnation as the madam. So there are no neat and precise parallels between the two of them. So even though you have replication and duplication, there are differences creeping in.
Yeah, it's kind of like the theme is almost same but different, right? So, I mean, and I think the most, like in my mind, the most telling sort of same it's different sort of moment in the episode is when Maeve is trying to enlighten Akane. There's the moment when she's tapping into her matrix powers, right? And Akane actually stops her and says, you know what? This is really not for me. And it kind of shows that even though they are very similar in some ways, that they're very resourceful, very protective, sort of very strong women, there is a fundamental difference because Maeve is ultimately more curious and, willing to explore her curiosity to to their logical ends, I guess. While for Akane, she's almost like, well, there's a limit to where I kind of want to go with that. I don't really want to be taken into this crazy world that you guys are living in. I'm happy with the world that I'm kind of inhabiting right now. So, I mean, it kind of plays to this idea of same but different. Yeah.
And that also highlights difference between Maeve and Dolores, where Maeve will sort of accept that Akane doesn't want to go there. She doesn't want to know the truth, whereas Dolores is going to force Teddy to see it and force everybody to see it. And if he won't see it enough and change enough, then she'll force that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to talk about that a little bit more deeply later on. But yeah, absolutely. That parallel between, the differences between Maeve and Dolores are really apparent in this episode. So if we keep moving on, let's have a quick chat about Maeve and her powers. How did we all feel that was... Firstly, do we kind of like the fact that she's super powerful now? And secondly, did we like the way that actually played out, like how she received those powers? Mags?
So one thing... Oh, go ahead, Mags.
Oh, no. I on the one hand, I thought it was really interesting that Maeve all of a sudden acquired these powers, but on the other hand, it kind of felt a bit gimmicky and quite sudden, and I wasn't really sure what the purpose was of her suddenly being able to tap into the Matrix and go into the back end, whether or not it was just a plot device, or whether or not it's meant to serve a deeper purpose in the episode. What do you think, Anaja?
All I can say about it is there's an obvious... so Maeve now has the powers that we've only seen Ford exercise before. So I think we have seen Ford exercise non-verbal control over the hosts, and we haven't seen anybody else exercise that. So I don't know if this is meant to symbolize, a transfer from the old god to the new god, or I don't know why she has this and no one else has this. Is it because she's the only one who's actually got free will and who's truly aware, and therefore she can tap into this sort of telepathic connection between herself and all the other hosts? I don't know what the explanation for it is, but I don't like it. I don't like it because it gives her too much power power, and then I'm forced to constantly be asking myself things like, why isn't she using that power to just, get everything her way right now? Like, she knew she had that power. Why didn't she use it sooner? Why did she wait till, there were knives at her throats before using it? And going forward, if she's unlimited in power, it's just not as interesting. And yeah, I'm just worried that I'm going to get frustrated that the power doesn't make sense because it gives her too much power, and I just don't know what they're going to do with it, really. Yeah.
Yeah,
Gerald?
Jazz, go.
That's the problem with this particular power. The show hasn't done a particularly good job of explaining what the rules of it are. So, for instance, why doesn't she deploy it when they first turn up at the Shogun's camp? Why do we have to wait to see the Shogun kill Sakura and Akane go through the long dance leading up to the Shogun's very violent death before Maeve whips out this power? What is going on there? Is it a power that only emerges when she is under mortal threat? If so, why? I think the show hasn't made any of that clear at all, which added to the frustration of the episode for me.
Yes, so I was really frustrated by that, right? Because she is there, like, mourning the death of Sakura with Akane. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself,
Your fault.
Well, more than that, you could probably just resurrect her right now, right? We've seen hosts, like, getting stabbed. It's not like her brain unit got destroyed.
Not real death.
Yeah, like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here, right? Why are we mourning? Because no one is really dead in Westworld, and she knows it. It was just, that was weird for me. And look, I absolutely agree with you, Anaja. Like, yes, this power is really undefined, but at the same time, I liked Maeve earlier this season, because at the end of last season, it seemed like Maeve had ultimate power, right? Because, she was just going around controlling hosts and people, and she was just walking out of there, right? And then this season kind of scaled it back, because hosts are malfunctioning, they don't really understand her commands, and they scaled back her power level. And I like that because it made her more resourceful, right? She had to rely on other stuff. Yeah, like she had to rely on her friends and forge out, like, alliances and that sort of thing. I'm like, that's cool. But now, all of a sudden, she's got this power where, like, she doesn't really need anybody now. She can just, like, enter the Matrix and just control. Anyway, I gotta say, that whole power and the way she acquires it as well, I felt it was really clumsily done, and I felt that, like, unusually clumsy for a show like Westworld, right? So, yeah, I definitely, I was a little bit disappointed with that for sure. Yeah.
I mean, are we supposed to take from this? Well, we know that the show, for the first couple of episodes this season, has set Dolores up in a lot of messianic imagery, but the really messianic figure might in fact be Maeve, who has these powers. So, is the show telling us now that Dolores is a false messiah in comparison with Maeve's true messiah, given that Maeve has acquired these powers? If so, I still don't see what the point of that is. I mean, it just seems to me that this aspect of the Maeve story is just a bit gimmicky, and the fact that we stop it halfway as she grabs a katana whilst a marauding band of samurai head towards her, just, I think, added to the sense of this lack of fulfillment in this episode.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like, even if they're going for her being the true messianic character, she doesn't really need the Matrix powers for that, right? Like, the show is already doing a very good job portraying Dolores as, like, a psycho, and Maeve as, like, a much more sympathetic, practical individual, right? Like, it's very clear that Maeve is really going to be the only character that, she's developing relationships with humans. She's just not executing them flat out, right? So, in terms of, like, building contrast between messiahs and sort of, building, I guess, legitimacy. I think they're kind of already doing that, even without the superpowers. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird one for me. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on then. Let's have a chat about Dolores, shall we? So this week, as Anna just said earlier, Dolores kind of... I mean, do we feel like this is really Dolores? Because she is really brutal this week and quite... I mean, she's just... she's just become this incredibly ruthless character. And if I think back on it, like, I mean, that character change feels a little bit odd. Like, am I the only one who kind of feels like her level of brutality this week was a little bit odd?
It seems consistent to me. She did slaughter all of those people in the, the army.
Yeah, that's true.
That episode. Yeah. So I think it's consistent. Also, I think you do see her struggle with the two sides of her, because she hears Teddy out. She hears what he would do. She tells him, "I'll think about that." She has that night where they have, they make love. She tells Teddy, she says, "Look, I have been questioning my feelings for you," which is true, right? And she's thought about it, and she realizes that even though it was a script, it was also real. Like, they did actually go through that, and those feelings are there, whether it was scripted or not. So I feel like she thought it out, and yet this part of her that's been so brutalized and so traumatized, she hasn't been able to let it go. It's turned into an extreme anger and rage and fear, and as far as she's concerned, there's only one way. Kindness is weakness, and weakness is like a virus that will spread and will infect the other people in her group, and that will bring them down. And so she has to wipe it out. She has to make that sacrifice, and she has to wipe out Teddy. So I don't think it's like... I think it's... I can understand why she is where she is, and I think it is consistent with the person she's been this season. Yeah, that's what I'd say about that. Gerald?
Yeah, I think it is consistent. I'm just not sure it's very interesting, at least at this point. I mean, there's nothing in this episode that extends her character beyond what we already know about her this season. We know this season that she is ruthless. We know this season that she is hell-bent on wreaking vengeance on humanity. We know that she is that she set a test for Teddy the last time we saw the two of them, that he failed, and she sort of walked off with an expression of disgust on her face. So we know all that about her. We know that we already knew that she regards Teddy's kindness as weakness, and the fact that she changed his personality this week does no more than see her acting on her beliefs, but it doesn't actually take her character very much further in circumstances where that character, as it is, ruthless Dolores, isn't particularly interesting. There's no sense of struggle with her. I mean, she says there's a struggle. She says there's a struggle when she says that, she thought about her feelings for Teddy, and for a brief moment she sounded like the Bachelorette about to refuse Teddy the final. But, I mean, despite that, I just thought, no, this is the same note being hit over and over again with Dolores, and it's just getting a bit dreary.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think one of my issues with Dolores this season is that she's no longer as interesting because, well, I mean, like for me, the only real interesting thing about Dolores this season is she actually still just on the rails, and is she just playing this white personality, or is it actually really, this is the sort of merged Dolores White character that's coming out, right? I'm still not sure about that, but part of me doesn't really care as much anymore either, right? I think for me, this episode, like Dolores' story this episode, is important from a plot perspective because it obviously brings up questions about what she did with Teddy, but I guess also it was probably more and I think we touched on this earlier already, like the compare and contrast with Maeve, because the big thing for me is that I'm not sure I agree with this idea that Dolores feels that what she experienced with Teddy is 100% real or has depth, I guess, right? Because, I mean, I guess, oh, I don't know, maybe it does, but I mean, the contrast there is basically that you have a situation with Maeve where she knows that it's not, like, a lot of the situations she gets put in are not necessarily real, in the sense that, you know, there's sort of storylines and that sort of thing. But I guess from Maeve's perspective, the way you treat people is still real. The relationships you build between individuals is still real, and she treats that with respect, right? And you can tell. There's a scene this week with Sizemore, where Sizemore is basically panning everything that's going on and saying that, oh, it's just scripted and all this type of stuff. And Maeve kind of turns around and says to him, like, you know, just shut up, right? It's not, like, we know that it's scripted, but it doesn't necessarily mean, just because it's scripted doesn't necessarily mean that it's unreal either, right? So it's kind of this idea that even though the hosts are living in stories, it doesn't necessarily change the reality of the host's existence, and the way they interact within those stories, the way they treat other hosts, and they interrelate, I guess, right? While I kind of feel like the contrast with Dolores is that she has fallen very hard on the side of, well, you know, none of this really matters. The only thing that matters is this sort of messianic crusade where we're going to execute some sort of crazy kill the humans plan, right? So all of this stuff that's happened in Westworld, all of this stuff that's happened with Teddy, all of this like running away and finding a better life type of stuff, forget about it, right? All of that stuff, like, is unimportant. Whether it's real or not is not, I guess she doesn't really even care. It's just unimportant and sort of gets in the way of that sort of greater goal. And I think, you know, for me, that's really the only interesting part of Dolores this week, that it sets up that contrast.
Is it just me, or was Teddy unusually stupid this episode, in the sense that he knows now that this is a theme park, and he knows that the cavalry are coming, but he nonetheless proposes to Dolores that they find a place somewhere in the theme park and live out the rest of their days?
Yeah, Teddy's a dummy.
Yeah, Teddy's definitely a dummy. He's a good-looking guy, but he's a trophy catch for sure.
Well, I like it, thinking about it though. In some ways, isn't that what Maeve is proposing to do, as well? You know, once she finds her daughter, what's the plan from that point onwards? So surely it's nothing different to what Teddy's proposing, which is, you know what, we know the truth, we know the reality, but does that matter in terms of our relationship with one another and what we want for our own future? And Dolores's view on that is, well, no, because we're all pawns in their game, and we need to actually take that world back for ourselves, which is the revolutionary cause. And she decides that the path to that is a path of righteousness, not a path of compassion, which is slowly the path that Maeve seems to be going on, based on, you know, for example, her interaction with Akane and the empathy she shows for Akane and her love for Sakura and their relationship. So, I don't know, I think Teddy's question or offer to Dolores just kind of cements the difference between the path that Maeve has chosen and the path that Dolores has chosen, and Dolores' views about that as being, well, that's clearly not the right path for us.
So I would actually, look, I agree with you in the sense that Maeve's outcome is probably similar to Teddy's in some ways, like emotionally anyway. It's really, you know, this world isn't really that great, let's just run away, right? And I think Maeve's outcome is kind of like that, but I feel like Maeve is less naive than Teddy, right? I kind of feel like Maeve has an end plan. Like, the sense that I've been getting all season is really Maeve's game is that she's going to find her daughter, and then everybody's going to get on the train and escape, and they're going to pretend to be humans in the real world, right? And no one's going to know, basically, right? That's the sense that I've got with Maeve, right? Like, for her, she does, like, I get the feeling with Teddy that sometimes he's still kind of playing that role where when he says they run away, it's kind of like, you know how they've got all those places that sort of form like sort of cornerstone goals for the host, right? Places like Glory or the Snow Lake or whatever it was that Sakura had this week, right? And I kind of feel like with Teddy, he's still talking about that sort of, well, let's run away to Glory. It's not Glory, but he's got his own version of Glory, right? While with Maeve, she's like, I know that Glory doesn't exist. Let's get out of here, but let's really get out of here, right? Let's get out of here into the real world. I'm aware there's a real world. You know, like, that's my end game there, right? And once I've got out of there, I'll have a new identity and I'll just, well, figure it out there, right? So I think there is a difference between them. Teddy does come across as, I don't know, for me, Teddy comes across as massively naive. Like, you can read that double cross from, like, miles away.
Yeah.
Also, the very first episode of the show, I think at one point Teddy takes Dolores off somewhere as they go riding, and promises that he'll whisk her away from Sweetwater someday, and they'll set up their life together somewhere remote and distant. And when he says that, something similar this episode, it's almost as if he's still stuck in his story, despite having been told the truth about what he is and what Westworld is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, look, maybe that's what really prompted Dolores to say, okay, well, we are going to change you. We are going to amp up the cruelty. We're going to amp up the ruthlessness. We're going to amp up all the aspects of your character that otherwise make you a bleeding heart. And so in order to sort of, I don't know, jolt him out of the fact that he's still stuck in his story.
I mean, that's a good segue, Jerry. So, I mean, let's talk about what we actually think has happened to Teddy, and let's talk about where we think, like, this all is going, right? I don't know. Like, do you think that all she's done is to jack up his, like, gunslinging skills and his cruelty and that sort of thing, or do you think that she's just turned him into a zombie? Because you can tell. Is it this episode? It's this episode, right? When they show Clementine and she's clearly just malfunctioning, right? Like, she's twitching and she doesn't really know what's kind of going on, right? And Dolores has surrounded herself with followers that are kind of like this, right? Clementine isn't the only one, right? Angela seems to be the only, like, sentient host, really, that she surrounds herself with. Everybody else is like this sort of faceless zombie style thing. So, do we really think, like, my sense was that she was basically just going to turn Teddy into a zombie.
She's turned up all his abilities, and if he survives a change that drastic, then he will be like a crueler version of Maeve, in that he will have these amazing, like, he'll have super intelligence, super everything, and super cruelty. If he doesn't survive it, then he'll be a zombie.
But is that actually what she did? I don't think she did that.
If you pause it, she's turned up everything. She's turned up cruelty. She's turned up perception. That's what made Maeve really super smart. Turned up aggression. Turned up loyalty. So
is that what happened? Because I paused it on that screen.
I thought so.
Because when I paused it on the screen, I saw that, like, they've got this thing that pops up that says overriding Theodore, whatever it is, heuristics. So I thought she was overriding his personality. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, why would this dude say he might not survive a change this drastic if what she was trying to do is turn him into a zombie? Like, that's not even surviving. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe we'll find out.
Okay, interesting. So you guys read it as that they were just amping up his statistics, essentially, to make him, like, a stronger, better dude.
I did.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, well then, I mean, given that that's happened, where do we think all of this is kind of going? Because we know that Carl Strand in, like, they're in the cradle now, they're in the command center, and a third of the hosts, like, I wonder if that's significant, right? Like, I mean, it must be significant, but a third of the hosts are just nothing, right? They're just blank slates altogether. Where do we think this whole Trojan horse game is going? Does anybody have any theories or ideas?
So, what is the cradle? Is it just the command center?
Yes.
What is the cradle?
I think that's the Mesa, right? That's where the train heads as well.
Do we know what? Because I'm just interested. This thing is called the cradle, yeah. And in the beginning credits, you know how we see a baby, like a host baby. Like, why do we see a host baby? Why would they ever be creating a host baby? I just wonder, because you know how I can't remember what the movie that movie where, you know, what makes a robot human is the ability to reproduce.
Blade Runner. Blade Runner.
Which is something that doesn't, a concept does not make sense to me, like why that would make them any more real or less real. But I just wonder if it's heading somewhere to, like, an idea of host reproduction without the need for humans to create them. Why is it called the cradle?
Yeah.
I always thought that was where they created new hosts. But that's an interesting idea about reproduction.
Do we think maybe, like, so Teddy, I think Teddy is the most interesting, right? Because you see Teddy front and center amongst those bodies, right? And, you know, the guy comes and says, hey, you know, like, a lot of these bodies are like virgin bodies. There's literally nothing being written on them. They're just blank. So why do we think Teddy is there? Is that actually Teddy, or do they just create a new, like, body of Teddy to dump there?
There's no way it's not a trap, though. I feel like it's got to be a trap. Because their minds have been wiped, so that the humans can't figure out what the plan is, isn't it? Isn't that why their minds are? Isn't that why their brains have been taken out?
I remember as well, Carl Strand's makes a point. Does that also mean that they've lost, you know, a third of their IP? And also at that point in the story, which is meant to be the present day or the future, they still don't have Abernathy. So he's also missing in the park as well. And so that's a huge piece of IP that they're still trying to lock down.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that that comment about we've lost a third of our IP is really kind of interesting and odd for me, because I would have thought that their IP is the host technology. But the fact that he says that, you know, if you lose the brains of a third of the hosts, that he's losing IP, maybe the IPs are the individual personalities of those hosts as well. That the individual personalities have value.
Plus, the hosts might be logging the human experience. You know how they're collecting human DNA and logging everything that humans are doing? So that could be in the hosts.
Yes. Yeah, because it's an interesting comment. I think we've covered pretty much most of the topics we really wanted to talk about this week. Is there anything else major that we've kind of missed? Anaja, Jerry, Matt?
I mean, there's Bernard. He's still standing around looking looking like, you know, he's got no idea what's going on. But surely he's going to be a big part of unlocking this plan. Like, he's going to open the door to the Trojan horse. So it's surely, like, he's a big part of it, and he must be. That's all I can guess.
What if Abernathy is the key to the Trojan horse? As in, they know that they want to get Abernathy, right? And they're going to do everything to get Abernathy. Maybe look, I don't know, I'm just theorizing here, right? But what if, like, them getting Abernathy and unlocking his mind is what sets off the trap, right? Anyway, just another dumb theory, I guess. Jerry?
Well, all I got to say is right now Bernard looks so clueless. He's almost an audience surrogate.
Yeah.
So, guys, I have seen the trailer for next episode, and I think it's going to be really good.
Okay. Look, I think No, go, Mags.
Oh, I was just going to say, what I can't wait to see is what happens next with the man in black and his daughter. Because that was a bit of a cliffhanger too.
Yes, this
Yeah.
is yeah.
What do you guys make of the idea that at least this season cliffhangers aren't resolved until a fortnight later because we spend the next episode dealing with completely different stories?
I'm okay with that, Jerry. Like, I kind of feel like they do these cliffhangers, but they kind of resolve them pretty quickly. Like, when they get onto them, it's not this crazy slow burn after they get onto them. They just get resolved, right? It's not like typically like stuff like this doesn't really last beyond two episodes, right? And I mean, I said this last week, but like the Delos thing was set up, and then it basically instantly got resolved. So I feel confident that like they're going about sort of cleaning house.
Yeah, but they're just going about it in a way that I don't think we've seen too often in TV shows, where you have parallel stories and you have one episode focus on some, and then the next episode focus on others, and then you return to the first lot in the episode succeeding that. It just seems structurally new. I'm not saying it's innovative or clever. I'm just saying it's not something we've usually seen in a television show before. Yeah, it does. It doesn't feel disjointed. It feels as if they're sort of stretching things out because they may not have enough story for 10 full episodes.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I mean, I haven't really felt that badly because each episode has still been quite engaging for me. Like, I think we all admit that this episode was kind of a weird episode, right? Visually stunning, but from a sort of meat and potatoes perspective, a little bit lacking, right? But I don't know. I still found it really engaging. I think like there are some shows that I've seen where it's really apparent that they're stringing stuff out. I don't know if you watch the Netflix Marvel shows, but those shows, like, there's many episodes in there. Like, there's a whole center part of those seasons where you just feel like, I actually don't really need this. I need the beginning and the end, and that's it. This could have been done in like 7 episodes.
The middle 4 or 5 episodes of the first season of Jessica Jones were just treading water.
Yeah, I would argue that the second season of Jessica Jones is a lot of that is like that as well, right? But it's I don't really have that sense with Westworld just yet. I kind of feel like that the individual episodes are still kind of well made enough that and engaging enough throughout that I'm not thinking, oh, this is a bit boring.
I just don't want them to keep adding new characters, because to be honest, I'm not that interested in the Man in Black's daughter, and I'm not that interested in Akane, and like they're kind of interesting, but not really. I want to know what's happening with the characters I've grown to love and I'm actually invested in, and I want more to happen with them. I just don't want these detours with complete strangers. I mean,
these people are kind of like the people from the back of the plane in season 2 of Lost.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think they have. So they've got 5 more episodes left, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're got to be marching towards some kind of resolution from this point onwards, or else lots of audience members are going to be pretty dissatisfied. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, I think we've pretty much covered everything that we really wanted to cover today. So, yeah, thanks everybody, as usual, for your thoughts. I guess we'll be here next week again for the next episode of Westworld. So
it's going to be good.
Yeah, it will be good. It will be good. It better be. Okay, thanks everybody.
All right. We'll see you there. Bye.
Bye.